Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Isaiah LXX. Last week, we stood on the banks of the Jordan in awe. We watched as a man emerged among us and heard John the Baptist proclaim, "This is the one I spoke of, the one whose sandals I am not worthy to unfasten." We witnessed the Spirit descend upon him, and we heard a voice from the heavens declare, "This is my beloved Son." Now, we watch as he turns towards the wilderness, and we wonder, what awaits him in the hills? Tonight, we will watch him as the birds and trees did. We will see this man walk among us, and for the next 40 days we will testify of him. So the question is, what will we see? What will we hear? What trials will this Word made flesh endure while we still call him friend and neighbor? Now keep this in mind as we begin. Very little is written about the temptations Jesus faced during those 40 days outside of the final 3. But reason and common sense helps us imagine what that silence may have held. Scripture tells us he was tempted in every way, just as we are. But does that mean he faced my specific issue? Well, yes and no. It's ludicrous to imagine Jesus stumbling across the desk in the desert and be tempted to fudge on his tax forms. But it's far more reasonable to believe that he was tempted to lie, to cheat, or to take what wasn't his. Not in modern form, but in internal pattern. Because temptation isn't about the props, it's about the pressure. So before we walk in his sandals, I think it's best to understand what temptations Jesus faced. We should look at the standard God himself set down before the children of Israel, the 10 Commandments. When we talk about the 10 Commandments, it's not just a list of do's and don'ts. Each commandment represents a category of temptation and a spiritual fault line. When broken down into categories, each one is a specific temptation that when we look at our own temptations, always fits into one of these 10. So say you have a modern issue with cheating. Well, that would fall into the category of not just covenant breaking, but also discontent. When we look at our temptations in this light, we begin to name the sins buried beneath the surface. We stop asking, did I mess up? And start asking, what category of my heart is under siege? So in light of the 10 Commandments, here are the 10 categories sins fall under. Thou shalt have no other gods. That would be allegiance. Thou shalt not make idols. That would be substitution. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. Manipulation. Thou shalt keep the Sabbath. Control. Thou shalt honor thy parents. Rebellion. Thou shalt not murder. Violence. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Covenant breaking. Thou shalt not steal. Entitlement. Thou shalt not lie. Deception. And thou shalt not covet. Discontent. No matter how you slice it, every single temptation we face falls under one of these categories. So while Jesus may not have been tempted exactly with gender identity or cybercrime, he may be tempted by allegiance, by substitution, by entitlement, or by control. He faced categories, and that's why Scripture says he was tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin. Hebrews 4:15. So it's with these 10 categories that we now look at Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness, not just to admire his strength, but to understand our own battle. So what did Jesus face during those 40 days? Did he come across a beautiful woman in the hills? Did he notice someone's walking staff and feel envy? Or did he have just one of those days where nothing seems to go right? It's impossible to say. All we know is what is recorded as the final 3. So let's start with those. The first one recorded is Matthew 4:3 and Luke 4:3, and is completely understandable. After 40 days in the wilderness, Jesus was hungry. No more than you or I would be. Not metaphorically, but also physically. And Satan knew it. If you are the Son of God, command these stones become bread. Matthew 4:3. This is a twofold temptation. It brings into question Christ's divinity, if you are. The second is the temptation to take things into our own hands instead of waiting for God. This would fall into the category of allegiance and discontent. And that's the thing about our own lives. We are rarely ever tempted with just one thing. Temptation comes in pairs, one visible, one buried. Appetite on the surface, allegiance underneath. When the serpent tempted Eve, it wasn't just about entitlement, but it was also not waiting for God to provide their needs for wisdom. So when we're struggling with sin, we have to look at not just one temptation, but the underlying temptations as well. Jesus didn't resist hunger because eating is a sin. He resisted the urge to act without the Father. And that's where most of our battles begin. This is actually a trifecta of temptation. First, Satan repeats the same bait as before, if you are. Still attacking Jesus' identity, trying to provoke a performance. Second, he's testing God's promise, twisting Psalms 91 to force divine action. This is rebellion, demanding proof instead of trusting the plan. And then finally, he manipulates Scripture, using holy words for unholy ends. This is manipulation. Weaponizing truth to serve ego. But Jesus' response shows us exactly how to deal with layered temptations. It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Deuteronomy 6:16. Jesus didn't argue, didn't perform, but corrected Satan with Scripture. He chose to trust in God's plan and not take things into his own hands. Think about it. If Jesus' goal was to spread the gospel, what better way to get people's attention than to jump from the top of the temple and survive? This would have been massive. It definitely would have gotten the people's attention. And I'm sure they would have listened to anything he had to say. In short, the spectacle would have gone viral. But Jesus knew the gospel doesn't need a circus. It can be spread with a simple whisper. This was Satan's last chance, and he knew it. It was all or nothing, and he wasn't afraid to go for the throat. He offered Jesus everything he could, literally the world, if he would just bow down and worship him. This shows us something critical, that the more desperate the enemy gets, the greater the riches he'll offer. But don't be fooled. Those kingdoms were not his to give, and Jesus knew that. That's why his reply is so final, so fierce. Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Deuteronomy 6:13. Here's the thing. When it comes to our own temptation, we must remember that Satan can and will offer you the world if you only bow. But one thing I've learned is that the promises of God far outweigh anything this world could possibly offer. I'm a huge retro fan. I long for the days back in the 70s and 80s where life felt simpler before adulthood took over and our world went crazy. But even if I could go back to those days, I still wouldn't bow to Satan. Because I believe that what awaits us on the other side will be so glorious, so perfect, that even my greatest day back then will be nothing compared to what awaits us when we are in the presence of Christ. I hope I've been able to show just an example of not just the hows, but the whys these temptations are so potent when it comes to how we are called to live our own lives. No, Jesus wasn't tempted to hate your coworker Joey who's always annoying you. But he faced challenges and temptations much greater than what we face. So the next time you find yourself struggling with temptation and sin, look deeper into those temptations and see if you can see the underlying issues. Give names to your struggles and then hand it over to the Lord to be placed in the forge and see what's burned away. So that's it for this week. And next time we'll look at the disciples, the men who walked with him, and why he chose who he did. I promise there's a reason that may surprise you. And of course, what kind of video would this be if I didn't include the recommended likes, shares, and subscribes comments, right? One might think I was sharing theology or something like that. With that being said, God willing, I'll see you all next Saturday. Until then, may God bless and keep you. Let him who has ears to hear, let us all hear.